Hi, Derek Whittaker from Blue Sky Factory. I wanted to share a concept that was a big game changer for me in terms of the way I looked at finance, business, investing, everything, and opened me up to a whole different world of what was possible. And I'll show you where this goes in just a few moments, but it's made a big difference. And it's something that I teach my students at Blue Sky Factory, because if you get it in your heart and you get it in your soul, it potentially can make a lot more money than you would have otherwise have thought. And I've got to give credit where credit is due. I got this from an organisation from KI. I learnt that from them. And when I got to understand it really, really well and ponder it and meditate on it, it made a world of difference. And it's this. There are two parallel economies that exist. The one is the Babylonian system, which is the financial system that you're probably familiar with. And then there's a preferred economy. The difference is huge. Let's dive into the first one, the one that you think is normal, you think is natural. If you actually look at where it originated from, it was in Babylon, hence why it's called the Babylonian System. And the dude who set up the Babylonian System was a guy called Nimrod. In ancient times, Nimrod was a conqueror, one who would dominate places and then set up cities and dominate there. And he was interesting because he married this woman called Semiramis, who was a prostitute, but the myth was, and they told society, that she was a goddess that ascended out of the sea. And those two together ruled over their empires, with one, this dominant hand of, dominion, and one that would subject people to horrible things. The other one ruled with fear in terms of religious ideology. And in terms of the religious ideology, what she did was basically twist the truth. We look at the systems where they would teach via the stars and teach biblical truths and God truths to people. Well, guess what the Babylonian system did? It invented astrology and basically twisted that truth to something else. And so we look at these aspects of what we've inherited over time and the commonalities and symbols that come from these cultures to where we are today. And you begin to realize that, the system that we're currently in is so far from the original design. It looks at this, look at the contrast from the preferred economy to the Babylonian system. The one big one is fractions, okay? The Babylonian system operates in fractions, whereas the preferred economy operates in multiples. Let me give you an example. You'll often hear financial planners talk about, how a 5% return on investment is a fantastic result for 12 months. But there are clues in nature that suggest otherwise. For example, farmers are very familiar with planting a seed. You put a seed in the ground and it can, reap a harvestful, 30, 60, 100-fold. And our finances were meant to mirror that multiplication effect. So I'm always looking for multiplication when it comes to investments, as opposed to earning in fractions. One of the other big differences was, of course, that wealth is made by toil in the Babylonian system, and that's one of hard labour. Now, I've got no adversity in terms of, no objection from me in terms of hard work. Absolutely. Harvest time, particularly when you're going to bring in your harvest, you got to work hard. But in terms of toil, that's something different. That's like enslavement. That's like working, 16 hours a day forever. Now, of course, there's some occasions and seasons in life where you've got to do a few more hours than you normally would. But we're talking over and over where, you're getting not just a full-time job, but also a part-time job at the weekends. And then a job on top of that, 3 jobs to balance what you're supposed to do. You're never meant to work that hard, all right? Whereas in the preferred economy, wealth comes through a spiritual law called the blessing. You look at the Hebrew word for that, it's actually the word barach. No relation to any former presidents, but it goes through this spiritual principle where the favour of God is on someone's life and he brings blessing to them. Notice it's a singular word, not blessings, plural, blessing, the favour of God, and attracting that. And that is an interesting process in itself, which primarily starts with relationship with God. But this is the thing about toil, is that it makes you enslaved to a system whereby you just get enough to stay out of being broke. In other words, a job, J-O-B, the line goes, the acronym for it, just over broke. In other words, we don't want you to disrupt the system that we've created, because if you do that, then, well, all hell breaks loose. So what it does, it creates just enough to get by. And yet people are finding that it's harder and harder to get ahead. And that's not how the preferred economy operates. It is made under the blessing, the favour of God upon their lives. The blessing of the Lord maketh rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. Or as another version says, adds no painful toil to it. And there you see the contrast. The other thing about the current financial system, the Babylonian system, is that it stops you getting ahead with taxes. Whereas if you look at the original design, the preferred economy, it was designed without taxes. Now, do I believe that you should do tax evasion? Absolutely not. You'll end up in prison forever, and it's not worth doing, okay? There are ways to legally, 100% legally minimize your tax, and that's totally different. But the point is this: give to Caesar's what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. But I don't believe in overpaying Caesar what he's actually worth in terms of what he's entitled to. So that's where I put the balance in place. Now, also one is charges interest on loans. The Babylonian system does that, whereas the preferred economy never charged interest on loans, as I've mentioned before. It was indeed the heart and intent was to give a person a leg up, to get started in life, or get a venture going. Then it's to be repaid, and everybody prospers because that new business venture is in place, and it's a win-win for everyone. In the Babylonian system, you'll also notice a contrast of incremental progress. All right, you'll notice that people work for 40 years for a corporation in hopes to get onto the board, right? That was never designed in the preferred economy. In fact, you can have unprecedented progress. We see the example of this where somebody's taken from the prison to the palace in one afternoon. I'm talking about the story of Joseph, who knew such oppression in that system, and then God breaks him out of there. His favor, God's favor was on him all that time, changing and molding his character so that he could then manage the incredible amount of wealth for his time in the biggest empire of the world, of the known world at that time, in terms of Egypt. And then we look at things like this. And by the way, he was part of a wealth transfer, right? He was part of, when the world went into famine, collecting and centralizing all that wealth from neighboring countries. And then 400 years later, that wealth is created into a sovereign nation when Israel leaves Egypt. It's a fascinating piece of history that plays out in those passages that you look in terms of the Torah. The other thing about the Babylonian system, it tries to take advantage of people, whereas the preferred economy, its contrast, it seeks to help other people. The movement that I mentioned before, KI, had a slogan called "All Shall Prosper," ASP. In other words, everybody's got to win in the deal. Now, let's face it, let's say you and I do a business deal together, and I win, you lose. Are you going to want to do business with me in the future? Absolutely not. And I like this high philosophy that they would teach as well. There's no point putting your competitors out of business because you end up paying for them anyway when they're on welfare. It just doesn't make sense. I have found too, when I do a joint venture with someone or a party, that it's got to work for them, it's got to work for me, and it's also got to work for the customer. And any time any of those elements aren't winning, well, you've got to relook at the whole way things are done and go, well, hang on a second, you've got to win, I've got to win, they've got to win, because we're not going to want to do business in the future if one of us is losing. It's got to be great value for people, and it's got to be great value for people who you're partnering with or joint venturing with. The other thing that is so phenomenal about the contrast between the Babylonian system and the preferred economy is that, it's recognizing that there's enough wealth for everyone, okay? And that's the contrast to trying to put someone out of business and your competitors out of business. It's recognizing, you know what? There is so much wealth that we can all enjoy it and all celebrate it and all get ahead, feed our families, see our families prosper, because it's so important we do that and create economies in society, because crime exists due to lack, all right? If somebody's incredibly wealthy, they don't need to go steal from their neighbour. They don't need to go steal from someone or steal a car or rob someone's house or rob a store or loot. If everybody's prosperous, they go, why would I want a criminal record to do that? And it's really, really important to recognise that when everybody is prospering, when we create economies in the world, that is allowing everyone to build wealth and to get ahead. And that's so critically important that we understand that and look at that. And this is why socialism is a really bad idea from the start. It's basically redistributing wealth to those who haven't earned it, who haven't deserved it, simply because a ruling body decides that, you know what, we don't like the way that you've got more than us, even though you've earned it and worked for it. The other interesting component of this is that the current financial system, the Babylonian system, seeks to control and rule over people, often using fear. Whereas the preferred economy, there's never meant to be fear. Okay, we're meant to have freedom, complete freedom of peace of mind. And it's actually, if you look at this, where does fear come from? Well, fear is often, the acronyms use false evidence appearing real. And people try to use wealth to intimidate others in the Babylonian system. I remember one very wealthy individual who would, often lend out to people. That was often one of their business models. And they would boom on the mic. I would see people cower in their office as they faced this person who ruled with fear. And this person would boom on the phone. I'd step out of the office and you'd hear him in the hallway going after someone using fear and intimidation. Well, we're not meant to do that. In fact, we're meant to lift each other up in relationship and help each other out. Now, I know that can be challenging when somebody is defaulting on a debt and, you're chasing them perhaps to try to get what is rightfully yours back and they're not communicating. But I think the heart of it all is, how do I preserve that relationship? How do I help this individual through this time and tough times? Whereas the Babylonian system has no space for that. I deserve this, the contract says this, therefore this must occur. And so it's really bringing the heart of humanity back and recognizing relationship with God is to be in our system, in our finances, but also given to other people. So my big point is this, and the biggest takeaway of all those contrasts for me that really changed my mindset when it came to investing and looking at different things in finances was the whole multiplication factor. That we were to operate in design by the multiplication factor. And one of the things that I recognize and look at investments is, does it have that potential? So 5-10% return sounds great, but I'm more excited if there's a multiplication factor in there, that it can do 100-fold, 200-fold, that sort of stuff. Now, some people say it sounds too good to be true. Look, it's doing due diligence around that to understand it. And I find that the knowledge base is so critically important. What do I mean by that? Well, the more I understand something and know about how it works and how it operates and how risk can be managed, that all goes in my favor. That reduces the risk for me because I know how the different moving parts work. It's when I don't understand how the moving parts work that I can run into issues and problems. And so it's recognizing that it's so critically important. And what I try to do at Blue Sky Factory is move my students from the Babylonian system into the preferred economy, move them into that system as much as we can. And some of that takes faith, some of that just getting education and knowledge to do that and how it operates is critically important too. And I'd like to invite you, if that sounds appealing to you, if you're looking for something like that, then pay a visit to our website, blueskyfactory.com.au. We drop the E on the blue, so it's BLU, skyfactory.com.au. Love to see you there. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, hey, by all means, drop us a note on the website and just give us your location as to where you are, so that I'm not calling you at some crazy hour of the morning. And we could look at doing a Zoom call, phone call, whatever might work in your region. Thanks so much for your time today. Have enjoyed this. I reckon this is a really one to look at really in depth. If you can get your head around what Nimrod did in society, what he did in terms of setting up the Babylonian system, and how we're to go back to the original design, the preferred economy, it's amazing how that gets into your spirit, gets into your soul, and allows you and affects the actions that you take when you actually take it on board. All right, look forward to seeing you at our website, blueskyfactory.com.au. Take care until next time.